Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeremy Goldberg. I'm president of League Apps, and could not be more excited to be with you on this Friday afternoon. We've got a tremendous guest speaker with us, someone that I personally turn to for advice and guidance, especially when it comes to communications. So I can't think of a better resource for today's conversation around difficult conversations to have in the context of this COVID-19 crisis that every youth and local sports organization is facing. We try to do these kind of invitation-only events for some of the most influential youth and local sports leaders in the country because we know how hard you work, how important you are to the recovery, and also the challenges that you're facing right now. And so we wanted to really make today's conversation a dialogue, a conversation, which is appropriate because we're dealing with one of the best communications experts you can find. And so the way this will work is I'm going to introduce Charlie. I'm going to pose some initial questions to him, but really invite him to kind of give some reflections around communications. And then what we're really going to ask you is to help steer the agenda. So there's a Q&A button that you'll see at the bottom of the Zoom. And so that's a perfect place for you to ask a question. Everyone else can see those questions and then upvote them so we can know the ones that other people want to make sure we're answering. And I'll incorporate those questions into the other questions that we received from some of you in advance. But without further ado, I want to bring Charlie Hauck into the conversation. What excites me so much about what Charlie will bring to the table is first and foremost an incredible amount of expertise when it comes to communications, right? When it comes to sales, when it comes to marketing. He's been the president of Growth Dynamics since it's March 2000, and really they understand all the different range of skills and strategies that an organization needs. Everything from talent to sales to management to leadership. To business development. And he's done that across a number of different industries and sectors and is sought after from Fortune 500 companies to individual leaders, to small and medium-sized businesses, to nonprofit organizations. One of the other things that I think is amazing about Charlie, though, is he also understands the world of youth sports. So when we're hearing this advice and perspective that is so sought after by his corporate clients, he has an ability, I think, to apply today's conversation in a way that's very, very relevant for the challenges that every youth and local sports organization has. And to be sure that those challenges right now are profound. First, you're in a situation where you're dealing with requests for refunds, requests or navigating questions of credits, of disputes over credit card charges, of just ways to figure out how to keep your revenue in your organization, because that is the lifeblood of what you have. And you've got expenses that you've already outlaid. You've got coaches to pay. You've got facilities to upkeep as you wait for a period of recovery. The second challenge you have is decisions with your coaches, your staff members, where you might be faced with really difficult conversations about salary cuts or furloughs or layoffs. And how do you have those conversations and do those in a way that's empathetic and effective and according to your values? And of course, then there's the question, especially in over 30 states now, where you're starting to open up again, where there may be programs again. But how do you actually have those conversations with your parents around safety, around the protocols for your kids, and make them comfortable in the way that you're selling your programs to convince families to rejoin what you're trying to do? So Charlie not only brings the experience in the corporate world, but also experience in youth sports. I believe that he was involved with a great soccer organization in Westchester. I think you're a lacrosse star as well. So I'm going to start the conversation there with Charlie, which is tell us a little bit about your youth sports experience. So when you're speaking today, I think the audience understands the perspective that you're bringing.
Jeremy, thank you first for the invite to be part of the conversation. And yes, youth sports has been a big part of my life, and I kind of did it backwards. I was a successful high school lacrosse player here in Pennsylvania, co-captained the state championship team in 1973, and no, I did not play with a wooden stick. But I then went on to play in college, and then after a college career, I played club lacrosse, and then actually went on and officiated college lacrosse, high school lacrosse, club lacrosse. And then I kind of got away from all of it after a while. And this is where the interesting thing came about. I was away on a business trip and came home, and my wife informed me that she had signed our two daughters up to play youth soccer for Westchester United, which at that time was the second largest club in Pennsylvania. And she said, "You're gonna be really excited. I got the girls signed up. They start in a couple weeks, and I just want to let you know you're the coach." So I did the reverse thing. I went from coaching the testosterone-laden college kids down to coaching 6-year-old co-eds. A different challenge from one to the other, that's for sure. But it went on from there and got a little crazier. We coached the first season and it was good. And having 2 daughters, the option became, do I just alternate seasons from one to the other? And at the sign-up table that next season, the astute volunteer for Westchester United heard the conversation and said, "Oh, don't worry, Mr. and Mrs. Hauck, we'll let you coach both teams." So I went from college to 1 team to 2 teams. And 2.5 years later, I ended up as the intramural director for Westchester United with, I think we had 110 teams. We had 19 fields. We ran the largest Joe Corby's Pizza fundraiser that they ever did at that point, and I was integral and part of that. But really, my crowning achievement was when I went onto the board of directors as the intramural director. We were making all kinds of plans for property acquisition, expansion of our travel teams, talking initially for the first time about hiring paid coaches. And I put my hand up and played the fool and said, well, I'm sure there's a good way to make these decisions, but do we have a mission statement that will guide us through this? And half the group wanted to shoot me, and the other half said, thank God somebody finally brought that up. So my first task as a board member was helping to write the original mission statement for Westchester United Soccer.
That's great. Well, I love the history there. And one of the things I think is important, and I think one of the ways to use today's session is I think Charlie can relate to the situation you all are in. So if you have a very specific scenario, a conversation you're gearing up with a parent or with a landlord or with a vendor or with a coach, these are the scenarios I think to bring and share, and I think people can learn from it. But Charlie, before we get into the kind of broader discussion, I want to give you the floor, because I think when it comes to your approach to kind of communication, and especially around difficult conversations, and I know over the course of my career, I've come to you with various scenarios and said, how would I handle this? Or I know other people have as well. What's the general way to approach this? How do we start to think about the concept of difficult or critical conversations and kind of some tips you might have around that?
Yeah, that's this is one of the things that makes what I do professionally and helping people with these types of situations. And I think there's some real key fundamental concepts that I don't care if it's in your workplace, in your soccer club, in your personal relationships. I think there's a couple critical things, but right off the bat, I think the first one is bad news never gets better with time. So yeah, I love a bottle of wine with the right year on it, and looking down and seeing a nice vintage really you can't wait to pop the cork and enjoy that. But bad news doesn't age the same way. The longer you hesitate, if you're trying to make the perfect message, if you're trying to cover all contingencies and all constituencies, that all takes time, and time really sours the situation instead of softens it. So one of the things that I stress to any organization that's dealing with challenges of, look, what we're dealing with now with refunds and what are our future plans, and you've got to deliver bad news to somebody. Don't make them wait. Understand there's going to be a consequence. It's just not appropriate to let it sit and kind of gather the wrong kind of momentum. There's a saying that we have is no news is worse than bad news. And human beings are remarkably flexible when you ask them to be flexible and give them the background to be flexible. So if no news is worse than bad news, don't let silence become your partner, because in silence, what happens is people's flexible imaginations start wondering, well, why isn't Jeremy talking to me? I'll bet he has something he doesn't want to tell me. I'll bet it's really bad news. And so the longer they get to ruminate and to imagine, the harder it is to unravel that damage that at the immediate might have been, okay, we can deal with that. But once you have to erase all the other images that they had created, you haven't done yourself a favor. So it doesn't get better with time, and failure to communicate is worse than communicating bad news. And I think those are two rules that are violated for the best intentions. I'm not saying anybody's trying to mislead their audience, but they're really rules that we should adopt as quickly and as thoroughly as possible.
Yeah, you know, it's an important point. It's one I've learned over in the career. So I'll raise my hand and say, hey, I'm guilty here. I'm someone who just likes to be liked. And so I don't want to be the one who has to deliver bad news. And one of the strengths that I've realized is my ability to be proactive and share some difficult information, regardless of the circumstance. Explain to somebody, you know, where we may have messed up or where something happened. People appreciate it when you're proactive around it. If you're being asked for it, you're already behind, right? So, and I do think one of the distinctions that I see that's happening right now is I see two things happening with local sports organizations. There are those that are going out there and being really proactive, right? I saw a great example of an organization that came out and said, hey, here's our financial situation. We're not going to give refunds as a policy because of this is what we're doing with our coaches. This is what we're doing and everything else. If you're so we're going to ask you to convert this into a donation. If you're in a position where that's really difficult for you, I want you to reach out. We're going to reach out to make sure you're comfortable with this, but this is what we're doing. And that approach was so well received by the parents versus organizations that, because of this uncertainty, are hesitant to say anything. But not saying anything is an answer. It's a response. And your point, they're filling the gaps themselves. So maybe build on that concept. So one is this idea of bad news doesn't get better. The other is a failure to communicate. But how do you communicate in an environment of uncertainty, right? Because you don't know when your programs are going to come back in. You don't know. So how do you even start to think about those kinds of conversations when you're not sure yourself with all the answers?
Well, that's one of the things that as leaders, when we think of the role of a leader, it's like, I know what's going to happen. I'm in control. That's why you elected me, or I got myself appointed as leader. We think that the role is somehow imbued with magical powers. And I know that sounds a little silly, but in some cases, and I see it a lot of times in the business organizations that I work with, the leader feels that because they have the title of CEO or president or director, that the only thing they can deliver is absolute information. Well, look, we're living in a world right now where if you watch the news at 7 o'clock this morning and turned it on at 12 o'clock, half of what you saw changed. And I don't care. You can pick any leader on any channel. I'm not going to pick a side in any of this. Their stories change because the circumstances change. So leaders have to understand there's nothing, it's not showing a weakness if you stand in front of your team and say, hey, I would love to give you a more substantial answer. But based on these circumstances, I don't have the final answer yet. We're still collecting information, but you must tell you, here's my next steps. Here's what we're trying to get to. And this is the critical one, Jeremy. And this is the one that once you're into the motion of communicating, you must give a timeline for your next step. So all processes that don't have timelines are almost processes with no base of reality, because I was going to get you an answer. Well, is that in 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 evers? And we can't let people, again, allow their imaginations to, well, why wouldn't he give me a timeline? If you have nothing to tell people, I have nothing to tell you. I will check back in 48 hours by next weekend. These are the things that we're doing that will give me the chance to bring more information then.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I know this isn't a broader concept of leadership, but so much about leadership is effective communications. There's actually a great book that I read called Culture Code, which I highly recommend, and looked and studied at successful cultures. And they spent some time with the San Antonio Spurs and Greg Popovich and understanding why does that organization win. And one of the things that that they say is a common trait among really effective cultures and really effective leaders that are leading effective cultures is the ability to be vulnerable, right? So if you pretend that you have all the answers when you don't have all the answers, that's not going to serve you really well. So one of the things I found when I'm even speaking to my team now is being able to acknowledge, hey, I don't have all the answers. This is the decision I'm making based on the information I have right now. I actually may be wrong, but this is how and why I'm making this decision. And more importantly, in a week, I'm going to come back and stand in front of you and give an update about how that decision is playing out. And I'll stand up in front of it and continue to again, present that information. So you brought up this concept of not waiting to give bad news, that the failure of communication is worse than anything. You've talked about this idea that as a leader, don't let your own sense of perfection to wait for the perfect answer stop you from that. And you mentioned, I think was really important, is your communications will seem more real when you're creating a timeline by which you're communicating, as opposed to kind of leaving it up for interpretation. One of the things I'm always struck by with talking with you is how much of your communication advice seems counterintuitive to begin with, right? That there's a notion of, the most effective work in communication actually works the opposite of how we might normally think about it. Can you elaborate on that concept? I think it would be really interesting for people to hear.
You flattered me by remembering that that's where we go with a lot of things. So thank you. That is the part that's most, it's probably the most challenging. I relate it to the fact that there's this 3-letter word that becomes problematic in most of these circumstances at some point. And that 3-letter word is ego. And our ego's job is to protect us against all attacks and all things that may make us look less than perfect or vulnerable. So your ego's job is to create a defense. And once you create a defense, you've essentially decided to not sit at the table with someone, but to sit across the table from someone. And that sounds like just a few change of words, but it's really very powerful. When we sit at the corner of a table, we work together. And the best way to defeat your ego is to just decide that, look, this isn't personal. What all your team leaders that are on the call today, what they're doing, it's not personal. It can feel personal because of their commitment, but it's the business of operating these leagues and providing for these communities and the children, and to give parents a chance to see their children to succeed. That's pretty important stuff, but it's not personal. It's not like Jeremy did this on purpose. And so we've always got to remember the intention. And if the other person's intention is positive as yours is, it's just a different opinion. So counterintuitively, instead of attacking, once someone attacks you, you fall back. So when under attack, fall back, give in. And so once you've said, you know what, I might not be right here. You've thought about this and I've thought about this. I want to hear your point of view, because maybe there's something you've thought about that I missed. And instead of being adversaries, you're now collaborative partners in finding a solution to something that looked insurmountable the minute before you said, I need to listen to you instead of just myself at this point. So the counterintuitive part is, when under attack, fall back. And the best way to win an argument is actually to lose it first. Because now we have the collaborative energy of two well-meaning people that can sit down and listen to each other instead of talk at each other. And so that counterintuitive process, I think that there's so much that we need to think about. When you think you should shout, you should whisper. When you think you should run, I think you should walk. When you think you should tell, I think the most important thing you can do is change your punctuation and ask a question. And that's a great way to think about the power of counterintuitive success.
Yeah. So let's take a scenario here. One of the things that I find these organizations, I think, are in such a difficult position is families put money against a season. And now they're saying, wait a second, I'm not sure if the season's happening. Maybe there's some virtual training going on and everything else. And now I've got to deal with this demand, right? I may not even have the money, or if I do have the money, I'm trying to figure out how to keep my staff employed and everything else. And so You're faced with this notion of, this is a parent in your organization that it may also be in difficult situations themselves financially. how do you handle that, right? Where you either don't have the money, or that money is so critical to being able to keep people in terms of their salaries and everything else, available and around.
Yeah, I think that what's critical is the landscape in which this takes place. And by the landscape, I'm not talking specifically about the pandemic stuff now, but I think the landscape that the organization has created with its partners, it's people that have signed their kids up and stuff. If the landscape is one of cooperation and listening and interaction, cooperative interaction with your parents and your families, I think that's the best place you can start. If it's the opposite of that, well, now you've got a different scenario. I'm actually in a professional setting helping someone deal with this right now, and it happens to be the gym I go to. As we all know, gyms were like first on the list to get shut down. And the owner of the gym where I go came right out and said, look, I've got to tell you the truth. This is going to be really hard. I want to survive. I think you'd like me to survive. I'm not refunding money. I'm asking you to pay as long as we have to, but the gym's not going to be open. I want to keep my staff here. You all love my staff. I need your help. And so the first thing to do is to, instead of telling people why they need to do it, is to ask them what would make it. So how do I get you to be comfortable with this so that you have made this decision? I haven't told you to. So people will buy for their reasons, not yours. So the moment you dictate, you're probably losing some credibility. Now, you've got to be confident and assured, but if you're dictatorial, I think people feel like they're not asked to be part of the conversation or part of the decision. So one, I think you've got to be willing to say to people, look, I've often used this line with people, and it kind of breaks up the tension. I've got bad news and bad news. Which do you want first? And so the bad news is we need your money to sustain ourselves and to keep our people connected to the organization. And you'd like those people to be there. So the bad news is we need your money. The other bad news, I can't give you your money back because of that. So how do we talk about it? And so by asking, how do we have this conversation so that we're both hearing each other and we both understand the perspective is the critical part of it. So go right out. And the other part of it that I don't want to miss at all, ask for help. Can I have your help? The world would be a better place if we all promised to ask for help 5 times a day.
Yeah, one thing I love the idea of enlisting them in the solution. So what came to mind, I was picturing let's say a soccer organization, is especially if one of the things your organization's been about, as you talked about, kind of what's the environment of the context of the organization you've created. If you put a big emphasis on team, right? That's let's say that value of yours. You can say, hey, I'm reaching out to you because you're teammates with us, right? We're in this organization together. And this is the situation I'm in. I've got bad news because I desperately need the resources that have been paid in the organization to keep our staff employed and to keep our facility opening. So we're there for your kids when they return. That also means I have bad news that I can't give you your money back. So help me figure out what we can do to recognize the fact that I need to keep this organization going. I need to rely on our teammates there. What ideas do you have about how we can make this right? And so they might, that invites them to come back with, maybe it's credits, or might be like virtual programming, or you might have ideas to that answers as well. But if you're inviting them into the process, I hear you saying, they're creating the solution with you so that their ideas are the best ideas, and they're going to come up with their own reasons for why they want to have you keep their money.
Yeah, when I think back to my time as the intramural director, I had probably 700 families that were part of the program that I directed. And I'd be a fool if I didn't think somebody out of that 700 didn't have one better idea than I had on my best day. You know, I was pretty good at some things, but there were guys that were, and not guys, or men and women that had jobs that they made decisions like this all day, every day. And they dealt with crises that came up. And so when you think of the collective power of your organization, you kind of invert the pyramid of authority and you start letting the people on the ground filter the information down instead of sitting at the top, kind of overlording the whole process. So I think it's really great to kind of, hey, here's what we're thinking. This is what we're inclined to do. And then you kind of tell the story and say, so that's what we're looking to do. We'd like your help with it. And the help we're even listening to is, do you have a better idea? Or do you have a way that we could work to do something that might be better?
Yeah, one thing then, and I think there's some good questions coming in, so I'm eager to pull them into the conversation. One question I wonder, Charlie, is you're in the situation where you can't even get people together in the same room, right? So first of all, is the best way for an organization to approach this difficult conversation around, let's say, refunds or credits, and there's a few questions coming in around that we'll get to, is the best way to have that conversation individually with each family? Is it the best thing to do is to send out an email so that everyone can see that at once? Like, how do you think about the way you're communicating this as much as the message that you're delivering itself?
Well, look, I think the logistic challenge of talking to 700 families or whatever the number is beyond what any club could expect of their leadership. So as much as I would love to wave a magic wand over that, I don't think that's possible. So option B is the email, the group email. But the tone of that email has got to be, look, at the end of every successful relationship, both parties are focused on 3 words. And it's kind of like, what are the 3 most important words in real estate? Location, location, location. The 3 most important words in every relationship are nurture, nurture, nurture. Every transmission that you send out, you've got to nurture the people that are there. And nurture means to grow, to develop, to raise up. And it's one thing I learned as a coach. When I learned to nurture kids, they were easier to coach. When I allowed them to disagree or fail or challenge or ask to do something that wasn't exactly what I would have done, they were more willing to listen to me. So I think as leaders, we've got to nurture the relationship with our people. And so everything that goes out has got to have I'm thinking of you as much as I'm thinking of us or me in particular. So that becomes critical. Email, unfortunately, that's the way it goes. I think if my secondary option would be to set up something like we're doing here today, is to say, hey, parents from A to H, we're going to do a Zoom meeting Tuesday night from 7 to 8, from 8:15 to 9:15, from I to P, and then the end of the alphabet the next night or something. I think that's an option that we're all learning to live with. Yeah. But it's got to be genuine and it's got to be nurturing.
That's great. So I want to, I know there's a question coming in from Liz Tamsula. So if we can turn on Liz's audio, I'll represent the question, but if Liz is there, it'd be great to hear. And she was talking about basically a policy being in place about refunds. And there's some folks that think that they've been unreasonable in keeping a nominal fee connected to the refunds that are being provided. Does it make sense to just, if you're dealing with someone that's really pushing back, just to concede to keep the peace a little bit? I don't know if Liz, you can hear me, or if you want to chime in and add a little bit more context here, but please go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, I recently just had a pretty difficult conversation with a parent, and basically we were keeping a $10 fee for a recreational soccer player who that's what our state association is keeping. So the club is essentially taking a total loss for this player. And the parent just continued to say how immoral it was, and you never know what's really going on in their life. So in this instance, I did keep the peace, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna just give you your money back, and I hope you guys will play with us again. But is that something, in the age of social media, like, I don't want people to be like, oh, just complain to them and they'll give you all your money back, or I don't know, is it a case-by-case basis? You just trust your gut, or is it better just to stick to your guns and hope that they don't contact Fox 31 troubleshooter news and blasted all over the place.
Those are the really challenging things. And so one of the other things that effective communicators learn to do is to say what they don't want to hear. And so the first thing that really, what's the one thing angry parents always threaten you with? You just said it. We're going to call the media. We're going to tell everybody we know about this. And they use it as a threat, as if the first thing you're going to do is grab your head and go, oh God, no, please don't do that. Please don't call the media. So one of the things that's really powerful to disarm somebody in that situation is to say what you don't want to hear. So if you were the parent, Liz, I might say to you, Liz, I know you're not going to be happy with our decision, and I understand that. And if you're as unhappy as I think you are, you might even choose to go to make it public, to go to social media, to call the local radio station or whatever. And if you're that angry, I understand if you think that's the best thing to do. I'll respect that in this case. So what happens is she can't threaten you with it when you're willing to let her do it. It all of a sudden loses its power. So we're never going to make everybody happy. Never. So you've got to make a decision that based on the circumstances that got you to that situation, what I love, if you gave, I don't know, Liz, I don't know your situation. If you said both my spouse and I, we both just lost our jobs, I could see in a certain circumstance you say, you know what, $10 to that family might be more than I ever realized. Liz, I'm just going to ask you, please. I might take it out of my own wallet and give it to her. But the worst thing you can do is tell people what they're not. You can't do that. That's not right. You don't understand. They understand all they have to understand, which is I'm angry as hell and you're not helping me. So you tell them, look, I wish I had a better answer. I just don't. This is our policy. I know you're not going to like it. And if we lose you as a member of our club, and if you choose to take this conversation elsewhere, that's your choice, and I understand if that's what you'd like to do. You'd be surprised how many people are like, well, darn, now I can't scare the hell out of her, so I guess I just better. They're not afraid of that. So they lose the teeth of their argument. It's not easy, but you have to be willing to go through the experience.
Charlie, just to push a little bit further, maybe on Liz's behalf, I think so one thing is a question of if someone's threatening you, one of the ways is to anticipate the worst. And as you're saying, if you're communicating that, you're disarming the threat of it. So if you're saying, listen, I understand if you're that upset about the $10, you might leave the organization. And if that is how upset you are, that over the $10, that's the decision you want to make. I understand that's the decision that you might feel that you have to make. What I've tried to do consistently with this organization is to make sure we're doing our best to keep our coaches and keep our kids and consistently think about what's best for kids in the program. And so that's how we came to this decision in partnership with the state association. But I'm curious to know, like, in just this general question of exceptions. Are there exceptions where, as you're creating refunds, does that get you into trouble, or do you communicate a policy around that so that if you're communicating a refund policy, you would allow the ability for people to then come back to you? What's the best way to handle that? Because that may be of a value for Liz to hear as well.
Look, I think at some point, most of us want to be people pleasers. We understand, though, that it's not the reality of the world. When the policies and the process can make the decisions, it takes the personal pressure off. My gut says, by and large, once the club has set a rule, we do everything we can, first and foremost, to uphold the rule, with the understanding that we're going to lose some people because of it. Once you start making exceptions, remember the creative mind that I talked about when people weren't getting information? They'll get even way more creative to figure out how to make themselves an exception. So I'm not a fan of there's always one or two. I understand that. There's circumstances where in a way, the soul of the organization has to say, you know what, we got to give them the $10 back. By and large, I'm not a fan of making exceptions. I'm a fan of telling people the truth and saying, this is a policy that we think is in the best interest of the club. We know it's going to upset people. We know some people are going to be very upset, and we realize we may lose some members over it. And we're very sorry about that. But if that's what you believe is best for you, we will never tell you what is best for you. Please do what you think is best.
Thank you. And Liz, that answer your question? Is there a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you both. That really, it's just tricky. So
very tricky,
especially when someone's yelling at you on the other end of the phone. Face to face is so much easier and just more genuine. So talking on the phone is difficult during these times. So that does help.
Well, so one of the things that I want to kind of make sure I say to all of you, some of the most powerful communication, and what you just talked about, Liz, is a great example of it. Silence is a powerful communicator. And so if you have somebody that's going on and yelling at you and yelling at you and yelling at you, you've got to be very careful that you don't allow them to get you emotionally sucked into their anger. Because what you'll start doing is reacting to statements. And I teach all of my clients in whether it's sales training, executive coaching, team communication, workshops and things, you've really got to understand the power of punctuation. If somebody finishes a sentence in a period, stay quiet, they're not done. If they finish in an exclamation point, stay away because it's a ticking time bomb. Only respond to questions. When you get exclamation points and periods, silence is your best reply. It is, because you're going to say something before they were finished, and it's probably going to be the wrong thing. So until you hear a question mark, silence is your communication guide.
Like my wife would appreciate that lesson. That's a good one. I definitely got to take that tip. I'm going to bring Chris Bear into the conversation. And Chris was sharing a scenario in which they're going to provide a refund, a smaller percentage. And is curious about what's the amount of detail that's helpful to explain, why they're keeping the refund, what the detail is. And maybe, Chris, you can add a little bit more color to the scenario. And I think a lot of it is around the theme of how much is detail helpful in the context of delivering bad news or communicating a policy, whatever it may be. So Chris, do you want to elaborate on that and maybe tell us a little bit about your organization as well?
With the club there, I used to have a relationship where with US Club Soccer, where I actually kind of worked with a lot of people there. So that was cool to see. I was really appreciative to hear your background understanding, because you're going to be able to understand this completely. Our club is travel only, about 1,000 kids, 800 families, and we've worked through several steps of this process already. We've been out front. We've been leading the communication process. My personal challenge is similar to what Jeremy was saying. I overthink too many of the scenarios of what ifs. What are they going to say? I've got a good board helping educate me. My wife's very good at helping, get me back to the basics, I guess, and putting out the message. I'm at another phase of this, which is now as we've gotten to a point of saying, here's the programming money that we didn't use and we're going to give back. My thought is, well, what if they don't think that's enough? And so I'm in a position where I'm overthinking how much we need to share about the overall budget. So just kind of help me get to a place where this is good, because that's what I kind of need. And that's where I need other people's feedback a lot of times in that collaborative sense to say, this is what people are looking for. This is going to be good. And even if there's that small percentage that complain and or like the previous person saying, if they're going to yell and scream, it's okay. We're not going to make everyone happy.
Yeah, this scenario is really important that people find a balance here. So one of the things that I teach people is to think back to whether it's Dragnet or SUV or SVU or whatever one of the cop shows are. There's always a moment in one of those programs where somebody says to a suspect, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, right? So what are they advising that person to do? If you open your mouth, we're going to write it down. And when when it's most effective for us, we're going to nail you to the cross with it. So my advice to clubs in these circumstances is remember, everything you say can and will be used against you when you can least afford it. Okay? Now, I think you've got to be 30,000 feet transparent. Okay? If you and your board of directors and your financial advisors, whether that's internally or externally, have said, this is the money we need to keep, this is the amount of money that we can refund. One, don't decide that more information is better. Not going to work that way, because for every reason why you say we did this but not this, you're going to have somebody that says, well, I don't like that. And then the next thing that you say, you're going to have somebody else that says, well, I don't like that, but I like that. And you're going to have 52 arguments on your hands inside of 5 minutes. So you make a general statement after careful consideration of all the costs and all the requirements we're going to need to move forward. This is the decision that we've made, and we know we're going to have disappointed more than 1 or 2 people with this decision. Just state it. Say, we know it's not perfect. We know some of you are going to be disappointed, and we're sorry that's what's happened, but this is the decision that we've made. Do not get into the habit of giving everybody the opportunity to inspect your books so that they can tell you, well, you shouldn't pay that, but you should pay that. And I can't believe we're paying those guys that much. And if you didn't, you're going to have everybody deciding they can run their club for their $5 refund. Not healthy. So I do a lot of behavioral studies. You sound like a person that likes to be consistent and thorough in what you relate to people. It's a great trait in a lot of circumstances. Don't let your style get in the way of your success in these types of circumstances. You and your board make your decisions, but remember, everything you say can and will be used against you in a court of
Public opinion.
Public opinion. Very good. I had some other words, but thank you for rescuing me.
Chris,
No, I
does that
appreciate
answer your
that
question?
feedback, Charlie. That was good.
Glad to help you. Thank you for asking.
One follow-up that Chris's point comes to mind is, so one is the idea that more details isn't necessarily better, right? And as you're communicating that, it goes back to this question of the best way to communicate it. Posing this scenario to you, which is, if you have your club organization, so maybe the dues or the investment level is even higher in terms of what you're actually keeping, and you make that decision, does it make sense to figure out a way, especially if you have a board or other coaches involved, to say, hey, you know what, let's divide up the list. Let's deliver this news, especially if it's a bigger investment that we're keeping from the organization, and figure out how to do that individually over Zoom calls. What is the best way to think about that kind of communication? You know, because if more personal is better, is that a better way of doing it? Should you if you know that these particular parents are particularly difficult, should you make an effort to video call them or call them directly, as opposed to rely to everyone get over the email?
This is a great question, Jeremy. So first and foremost, you can't do that. You can't even entertain that idea unless, and the unless is the critical part, everybody knows exactly how to deliver the message so that the message is consistent throughout the delivery. Okay? And that's so important. When I was on the board of directors, there were some decisions that we made relative to developing a piece of property, or relative to whether or not we were going to go to the number of paid coaches we were going to put on the payroll for Westchester United. And in the board meetings, there were some very, very heated conversations, pro and con for both things. And as with every organization, as with every decision, it's very rarely unanimous, and the passion's very high. So we would come to an agreement as the board, and we would all vote, and we would all ayes, nays, and the ayes won. Nothing created more problems than when somebody on the board said, the board voted for this, but I don't think we should have done it. And so they actually fractured the power of the board. And I think at its most important level, our job as club administrators is to protect the mothership. We've got, some of these clubs are 50 years old at this point, and they have a great legacy of serving the community and developing talent and providing outlets for young people, and in some cases providing a place for disadvantaged children to get into organized sports that their families couldn't afford. These are great organizations with great missions. The moment somebody wavers on the message, I can't help you once that happens. So I like the share the work. I like that a lot. But if somebody goes off script and says, I really think they should give you your money, but this is what they told me to tell you, I'd fire somebody faster than they could hang up the phone. I'm a hire slow, fire fast executive guy. When somebody doesn't understand the impact and their personal feelings about things overrides what the organization decided to do in the proper methods, they can't be part of the team.
And that, by the way, you're making that case. That's true, not just, by the way, of employees, but in this case, customers, right? In the sense that if they're not on board, as you said, that's okay. And you give them, you're accounting for the fact that if that's the case, because you're going to benefit from that strength. We got a bunch of folks that are eager to ask questions. I know Stephen Keller, there's an ability to raise your hand. So I know he's raised his hand, and I think there's a question around negotiating the amount of a refund. So Stephen, let's bring you into the conversation and have you pose your question to Charlie.
Stephen,
we just got to unmute.
Now?
We can hear you now.
All right, yeah, the question had to do with possibly getting into individual situations with individual people that had sent you larger amounts of money, and now obviously they're in financial trouble, but so are you.
Say that again, please.
This situation has to do with larger amounts of money, where somebody has sent you and paid for something for a larger amount of money. Should you get into individually maybe negotiating with them and saying, well, you gave us 1,000, at this point we can only give you 250, but then we're closed?
Look, I would be, I'd be wrong if I answered that question without more detail. And that's where, so I would have to know a whole lot more than what you just gave me, but I would kind of stick to my comments earlier about exceptions. I find them to be, once there's a rule that's broken, there's no rules. If it's a larger amount of money and somebody's circumstances are really challenging, and like, as I mentioned before, if the soul of the club says, you know what, that's one, I got to listen. I got to think about this circumstance. I think if you have the right people in the organization, the right things will get done. I don't know that I could write a blanket answer to that situation, Stephen. I wish I had that power, but there's so many variables in it that I can't feel comfortable saying, yes, this, no, that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm going to pull Scott Cronk into the conversation. Scott posed a question about they have a refund policy. A lot of organizations do that say, hey, once the organization starts, there's a lot of cost that's incurred. You don't get your money back. And they've only ended up playing, I guess, one game. Is that right, Scott? And then I think you've got a question about maybe how to think about handling that. So you want to pose that scenario?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So, yeah, I'm with the Lake Travis Youth Association down here in Austin, Texas. So we're actually still hopeful that we may play. And so we have a published refund policy that takes you through various scenarios. Like during the registration period, you get this back. And once teams are formed, you get this back. And it goes to, hey, once the season starts, there are no refunds. right? So that's a scenario we're in. You know, you take soccer and baseball as an example. Most of those kids have played one game. And while we're hopeful that we can still play with the slow reopening of the state of Texas, we have people that are just reaching out saying, look, even if you play, we're just not interested in playing. We don't think it's safe. We're not going to be here this summer, whatever the excuse may be. So, I mean, to date, we've pretty much held the line, but we are thinking something like, and even thinking through, if we don't play, even though our refund policy says no refund, right? Are we breaking the rules if we say, look, we understand the scenario and we're in a position to give you a 50% credit for a future registration? So that's what we're wrestling with, dealing with the one-offs, anchoring back to the refund policy, and working through the what-ifs.
Well, this one to me, this floats between the communication competency and the business operation competency. And so if you've only played one game, there's a certain amount of cost that you haven't incurred. So I would look at what cost savings did we realize because we didn't play 10 games or whatever the season is down there in Austin. I had a good friend's daughter was an all-star in your club 15 years ago. So it's nice to hear that name. I think that's a business decision. And like we talked about earlier in a couple circumstances, there's always going to be a number of people that you could send them every dollar back with an extra $10 and they'd complain about the envelope that it came in. So I think what you've got to do is look at the big picture and decide, look, is there upside to doing this much? I know what our policy is once the season starts, but I think what you communicate is our policy is this, but in light of these extenuating circumstances, we as a club have decided to do this. I think you state your policy, you reiterate your policy, and then you say, but this is an exceptional circumstance, and therefore, but I would lean to not making it, I would err on the side of being less generous than somebody's instincts might be.
So just as a reference, we figure that at the first pitch of the season or the first kick, we own our complex. So we own the 20 acres. We have to maintain them. We have paid staff. We have about 7,000 kids playing a year. That at first pitch, we spend about 70% of the fee. And it's a simple calculation. If you take somebody through baseball, right, you're saving umpire fees, trophies, and maybe a little bit of field maintenance. That's variable cost field maintenance. But if you add that up, it's about $50 a kid on a $200 to $250 registration.
Right. Yeah, I look, I'm going to go back and repeat what I said before, protect the mothership. And protecting the mothership in some cases is not giving stuff away. And in other cases, it is giving some stuff away. So I think with protect the mothership as the anchoring statement, you guys have enough genius in that neighborhood to kind of figure out what you think is the balancing point. But I think you've got to communicate it with, look, our policy is this. These are extenuating circumstances. These are trying times for everybody. Therefore, but be prepared. Everybody that wants more is going to scream the loudest. And there's another rule about communication. Never deny anybody's right to their emotions. If I'm so angry, too many people say, you shouldn't be angry about this. No, for whatever reasons they got angry, they should be angry. Never deny another person's emotions. Whatever creator you believe in gave us those emotions, let them have them. Go. It makes sense that you're upset. It makes sense that you're angry. I know I'm going to disappoint you. I apologize. Saying, can you help me and I apologize would change the world enormously. But you're in a business decision that needs to be communicated effectively. Yeah, I know. Once we registered kids here, look, we paid for referees and we paid for the field to get cut once a week. The big thing was before the first tap off at the middle of the field happened, and that's just the reality. People think it's like 11 games, each game costs the same amount of money, and that just isn't the way the clubs work.
Thanks, Scott, for your question. Appreciate it. And I think it's interesting, Charlie, as you were sharing your perspective here, it seems that, the sooner you develop whatever that policy is, the better off you are, because people are going to be wondering and inventing. So the sooner you could say, hey, this is what we've done. We've calculated, we've incurred these costs. We've been able to offer everyone a $25 credit moving forward because of costs that have not been incurred. But what most important for us is to make sure that we continue to thrive as an organization and are there for your kids as we return to normal. And the second thing is that if one of the things, you've only had one game and there's a question about return, especially in the state of Texas, it goes back to, I think, your suggestion about the cadence of communications. Yes. We know that one of the reasons we're holding on hope that we'll be able to provide some programming is we're going to update you every week. We're going to send out an email to tell you what's going on. Even if that update is we still don't have the information. So that proactivity, I think, will allow you to control the narrative. A lot of what I hear you saying.
Yeah, that's where, look, bad news doesn't get better with time. No news is worse than bad news. Those are such fundamental concepts that should be guiding everything that we're all doing with these organizations. It's okay to not have an answer. It's okay to say all the information is at hand, but you have to have a timeline on when you're going to fish or cut bait.
Yeah. Final question, Dave Leverchek. Dave, I'll put you into the conversation, and I think you're curious about if you don't want to offer refunds or really want to offer credits, how do you message the credits versus refunds, and maybe some tips around that? So you want to give a little context as we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. We're a travel soccer club in the Chicagoland area. It's the end of our season. We go August through early June. We have obviously not been able to do anything on the field since mid-March, but we've been doing things, Zoom meetings with teams, and we have a training app, et cetera. And we've been highly communicative throughout this whole period. They just decided to cancel our leagues last Friday, the local leagues. We communicated about that in the middle of this week and said, look, we're working on how we're going to handle the financial side of it. And in the communication, it said, we'll be applying a credit to your account, and it give us a little bit of time to work through all this. We're pretty close to knowing what that number is going to be, but our board is very hesitant to give out money. They want to give credits, which I completely agree with. I think my question is, I think I know the answer, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. My messaging is going to be, everyone, here is the amount you're going to get as a credit on your account. I mean, the other twist for us is tryouts is happening pretty much immediately. So the idea is as well as to help with retention, right? Because where you can just apply this to your deposit for next year. At least that's the thought. We will probably lose some people. It's possible. I mean, I think it's possible because of financial realities as well, but just curious to hear your thoughts on the messaging side of that and how to best position it. I mean, I've tried to set it up already, as I mentioned with my last communication, saying, hey, I didn't mention the word refund, I said credit. So I have a feeling if someone comes and screams and shouts loud enough and gets to the board will, they may relent and give them cash in certain cases. And I personally think that's okay, but we're not going to publicize that that's an option necessarily.
So first and foremost, today's the 1st of May. Happy May Day, everybody. I think you and your board need to have a team call and say, we've got to make a decision in 5 days or whatever it is. I think based on the timeline you just laid out, it's got to happen sooner rather than later. And everybody's just got to say, it ain't going to be perfect, but it's got to get done. And that's got to be the operating model on delivering the message. What the message is, I would say my experience in these things is I would lean towards credits as well. I think that you are saying to people, we believe we're going to be here and we believe we're going to deliver. We're going to give you credits. It's you know, everybody will get upset at one point about it. And initially everybody thinks, oh, we're going to get our money back. I think by and large, people are pretty astute enough to understand that doesn't happen very often. So I think it's more, make your decision. I would lean toward credits. And then one of the things that you can always do is, you should always do is always give people permission to disagree. And going back to anything you say can and will be used against you, make it a simple, brief statement that based on what we've looked at and how the club operates and what we believe is best for the long-term future of the club, including all of your current players, this is the decision that we've made. We're going to issue credits. I think that, you know, one of the crazy things is if you started to give refunds, you would start giving refunds to people that would then just turn around and sign up. And that would just be nuts.
Well, that's actually absolutely part of the part of the conversation. And to be, I mean, we had a board meeting last night, so I mean, this is the direction that's been agreed upon. Is
Yeah.
we're going with credits. And frankly, I mean, I'm planning on having this message ready to go by Monday,
Thank you.
because you're right, it needs to come sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
And when sorry, go ahead, Charlie.
No, go ahead, Jeremy.
I was going to say one thing, Dave, I'll invite you to do and invite everyone is we'll post in the chat tool a link to our industry Slack group. So one of the things you can do is post some of the communications and have other sports organizations see what their messages are, and you can see what other people are communicating and messaging to get kind of wisdom from the crowd. We might even introduce Charlie to the group as well, so he can be a resource and you know, relive some of his youth sports leadership days as well. So Dave, I'll certainly invite you to do that, and we'll post that link in the chat tool as well.
Great.
As we wrap, Charlie, I do want to pose one last question to you as a final thought for everyone. Everyone here is going to basically and try to get parents to sign up for their programs, or maybe adult participants to sign up for their programs. And in an environment of a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions about stops and starts and safety and quarantines and recurrences and everything else, how do you sell in an environment like that? What's the big tip you give about selling your programs in an environment of a lot of uncertainty?
So I'm probably the last person people want to talk to about this stuff, because once you said everything's backwards, that's right. This is where I think it should be most backwards. Selling, when you try to talk someone into why they should join your club, I can give you 15 reasons why you should play for our club. But those 15 reasons, as valid as they may be, can be trumped by one roadblock reason that just takes somebody out of the conversation. So in the type of training I do with business development people, no is way more important than yes. And if you're going to get a no, I think we should deal with the no on the front end and allow people to say, well, that's not a big deal for me. I trust you guys. It's not going to be safe anywhere. You're not going to be any more dangerous than any other organization my kid would be with. So I believe that the pitch or the presentation at this point should be, look, we're going to operate our club and we're going to do everything that we can to make it as normal as it can be, to be the organization that you've all been comfortable with and have been part of in the past. We understand these areas of concern may impact your decision to enroll your child or to sign up your child. We understand the concerns about social distancing may be a deterrent. We understand that the uncertainty about whether or not the COVID-19 is passed. We understand that, that there's been some disappointment in the way we've had to operate the club under those circumstances. So I think there's always 3 to 4 reasons that people are thinking about. If I'm going to get told no, when do I want to get told no? Early or after I've already spent a bunch of money, effort, and energy just to find out that, you know, we signed up the kid, they waited for a team assignment, we ordered them a jersey, we went through all that stuff, And then when you get to a week before practices start, you get 22 phone calls from parents that go, well, now we're really worried about COVID-19. I'd rather have them be worried about it today than then. That's my belief in the way you should be selling.
So basically, you put the objections up front. You say, these are all the things that these are all the things that may affect your ability to sign up. But if you get past those things, here's the reasons why you'll be part of it. But don't be afraid to surface those obstacles.
Yeah, it's look, salespeople are like, don't bring up the price. Tell them how awesome the product is. Once they get all excited about the product, they'll be brain dead and will buy whatever price sticker we put on it. Never happens. You get a lot of buyer's remorse and a lot of it's not what I thought I bought. I don't want you to do that with kids. I don't want you to do that with what should be one of the greatest experiences of their life. And I don't want a bunch of parents thinking we weren't upfront and honest, not just about the club, but the feelings and the concerns that they have. When your parents will become your greatest advocates when they believe you will always do what's best for them, even if it's not best for you. Now, I know we've talked a lot about not giving money back, but that's costs that are incurred. If you will say, it's okay, we're not going to be crazy, don't worry about it. That pandemic stuff, that's never going to be a problem. Think of how you want to be on the other side of the conversation when you're asking people to put their kids in your care. That's what I think is most important.
That's great. Well, Charlie, we appreciate all the time. This was an amazing conversation. We're eager to kind of continue to surface your expertise within the world of youth and local sports. You got a lot to offer. So I'm certainly grateful for you spending the time with us. I know I speak on behalf of everyone else. We're eager to kind of wrap up some of the findings and discussions of today and turn that into great communications. Yeah, my son has just come in here. He's very exciting. So that's my cue that I think I'm on the clock. But thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate it.
Please feel free to put me on your list. Any of you, if you have a one-off, if Jeremy can forward my contact information. Look, I won't do hours and hours of free consulting. You can pay me for it, but I'm happy to listen to you one-on-one over the next 30 days if I can help you.
That's amazing. We'll make sure Charlie's information is available. We'll invite him in that Slack group. And, I know I've benefited personally whenever we've engaged Charlie formally, and certainly he's a resource for the community. Appreciate your time and then also the potential for him to collaborate. So we're eager to surface your expertise, Charlie. Thank you for being this expert. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you.
Enjoy a great weekend. Take care.
Thanks.